going on, sports family? It's your favorite two grown-ass men, Mike and Jamal. We're talking sports with you. Hey, Mike, say what ups to the sports family.
What's up, sports family? Glad to be back with you guys.
Yes, sir. Hey, sports family, thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. Unfortunately, what we have to talk about is just another incident of police brutality. But before we get started, we want to pay our respects by giving Mr. George Floyd a moment of silence. Thank you guys for that. We got another great episode. Again, unfortunately, it's something that we hate to talk about, but it's a needed conversation, a much needed conversation. Oftentimes, athletes are, looked at as, the person or the people that can put their money together and fight causes that are important. Natural disasters. They're expected to donate their money and their time to help in efforts that are very important. But the flip side of that is that when athletes get involved in politics and that directly impact them and affect their communities, they're shunned away from it. They're told to shut up and dribble. And Mike, so the question I want to raise and ask you is that what's your stand and how do you feel about athletes getting involved in politics and social matters of police brutality and injustice?
I mean, my thoughts are everyone should feel empowered to get involved when you see something going on in society that you know is not right, and athletes have a easier and a bigger platform to do that, and so I'm excited to see a lot of athletes speaking up. But we've also said a long time, hey, Black people have been fighting, minorities have been fighting inequalities for a very, very long time. And we've also said that those same people can't necessarily drive the change, that we're going to have Caucasian people step up and speak out and say, hey, this isn't right, and really kind of champion that. And so I'm cautiously optimistic when seeing people like Steve Kerr, Stan Van Gundy, J.J. Watt, Carson Wentz, Joe Burrow, all speaking up and saying, hey, this isn't right. And maybe they don't have the answer, right? But they're now speaking up and saying, hey, this isn't right. Like, we all can see that this is a humanity issue. And I think with people kind of doing that, it really goes forward, and maybe there is a chance for change. That's why I'm also a huge fan of Anquan Bolden. He was in the NFL and still had years left on his career where he could contribute to any team. And he walked away from that career to really champion change and try to change laws and things like that for the community. So I am a huge proponent of athletes trying to use that platform and some of their notoriety to really try to change some of these laws and some of these systemic issues that we have in our society.
Agreed. I definitely feel that same way. It just kind of turns me back to, we use the most recent example of what happens to an athlete when they stand up, and in this situation they take a knee. Colin Kaepernick, of course, we all know that he's no longer in the NFL, not by his choice, but by design of the system. Um, and it's almost the sad reminder. This is what's going to happen to you if you go outside your lane. And the narrative has been changed a dozen times outside of what the narrative really is. Colin Kaepernick, with his own words and his own actions, said, what I am kneeling for is police brutality and injustice against people that look like me. And what it says is that, just like you said, regardless of your celebrity status, regardless of how much money you make, you're reminded every day that you're 3/5 a person, basically. if we can see innocent man of it be found guilty. He got Judge Dredd. He was he was found guilty and executed. And we all know in the movie Judge Dredd, he's the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And that's what that officer did at that moment. That's an example of what Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee for. But yet, you know what? The narrative got changed to he's un-American. He what's more American than demanding your rights and your freedom? What's so un-American about that? But I guess from this point of view is that those same rules and luxuries and rights that apply to others don't apply to people that look like Colin Kaepernick and look like you and look like me. With that being said, Mike, how do you feel? Do you feel like there is going to be more traction, more momentum after this recent murder of an unarmed black man? Do you feel like there's going to be more traction in this movement of social injustice?
Um, yes and no, unfortunately. With this particular case, as I kind of see how it's starting to play out, and they just announced that the officer was arrested, but as you see it kind of being set up, it looks as if it's being set up of where the charges aren't as strong as most people would have liked, um, and there potentially could either be a plea deal to lesser charges than what's already there, which means this person could potentially serve less than 3 to 5 years in jail for a murder. And we have people that sit in jail for much longer time for nonviolent crimes. So yes, I think there may be traction, but I think we won't see the change because in this particular case, um, what I would challenge people to think about, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here, is when you had a kind of a peaceful protest with Kaepernick, right? There was no violence, what have you, and there was so much blowback. And I think the question was asked during that time, well, how should I protest? Right? If that's not the right way to protest, how should I protest? Um, and we never really got a good answer on that. It was kind of, well, do that on your own time, or do that off your platform, but kind of get out of our face with the protest. Well, now you have a boiling point where people are protesting and doing it, violently, which I'm not saying I agree with, or whatnot, but people are now going to the other extreme of protest. And the first response is, hey, you should do a nonviolent protest. Well, that was tried and no change really came from that. So I think people are just trying other avenues. Now, my thoughts on violent protest and looting and vandalism is anybody can break a window, right? Anybody can set something on fire. But if we really, really want change, we're going to have to stop giving other people the power for the change. And what does that look like? That looks like changing our perception of the profession of police officing so that more minorities want to become police officers, so that those minorities can police their own neighborhoods. One of the things we've always said is, well, the police should live in the areas that they police so that they have a connection to that community. Well, you can't force somebody to live where they don't want to live. So if we want that to change and we want to have a better interaction with the police, then we need to change our stigma of the police profession and get some folks in the department and get some folks in there so we can police our own areas. Um, the other thing is, I don't see a lot of minorities my age or younger getting into politics, getting into trying to change laws. And if you want the systemic things that are happening in our society to change, we're going to have to get involved in being part of those processes So I get everyone's angry and everybody wants to be heard and seen, but that's the fight that people have to make, because all this other stuff, 2, 3 weeks from now, those fires are gonna simmer down. Those things are gonna go kind of to the side. But who's gonna champion those fights, those long fights, to get laws changed, to lobby, to get the backing that you need for the people to get law degrees that can specialize in these fields, so that we can have the right conversations. Um, until we as a community start pushing that angle and that kind of perception, I'm really struggling to see how this changes and how it makes a lasting change past 2 weeks from now, or after this man's buried, or after the verdict comes out of this trial, or what have you. Like I struggle to think that it won't go back to the way it was until we make that change as a people.
Yeah, that's some really telling insight. One of the things that, from my perspective, is almost, it's the tale of two cities in our way of the way we live and our way of thinking in comparison to our counterparts. Um, this recent situation is something that, the Black community is immune to. We're accustomed to it. And that's really sad to say that, because we're again talking about nonviolent crimes, potential crimes that were potentially committed, but we don't know that. Oftentimes the we're misled by inadequate, incorrect information, to paint the picture as the officer was just doing his job, um, uh, policing these thugs. And the mindset of how America views us is very telling. And when I say the tale of two cities, is that here we are yet again. You have another example. A few months ago, Miss Breonna Taylor, who was an innocent Black woman sleeping in her home, in her apartment. Her door gets her whole apartment gets shot up. Um, she was murdered on account of the police saying that, hey, you know what, she was involved in drug activity, or there was someone involved in drug activity. And back to what you're saying with this systemic problem with police brutality, the police corruption, is that how can a community trust things that the police are doing and what they're saying when they're just outright lies? Recently, some information was released about that situation, about that murder of Breonna Taylor, where the cops were granted a no knock warrant, and which means that they believe that something's about to go down and they want the element of surprise. But what they said on the front end was that they identified themselves as police officers several times. And keep in mind, this is in the early parts of the morning, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And what I find very telling, and again, no different than what we always expect and we're accustomed to, is that the police side is the side that's going to, oh, they're police, they're going to tell the truth, what they say goes. But how is it that what actually happened never aligns to their story? And so again, we're led to believe that this innocent person who's the victim was guilty of something. And you and I have talked about this before, is that our counterparts will often say, well, let's wait for the facts to come out, or, well, what did they do? It's almost like that, if you're guilty of something because you're Black, you know, um, me personally, I've never been arrested ever in my life, and knock on wood, never been arrested. But that doesn't mean that um that how I'm viewed and how I'm seen is guilty of something. We also saw recently um how white people are some are weaponizing the word black and African American. Um, the damsel in distress situation in Central Park, where a white lady deemed it necessary to call 911 and stated that her life and her dog's life is being threatened by African American man. And the video showed completely polar opposites. And not only did what she did was completely wrong, inhumane, unjust, her company deemed it necessary to fire her because her actions weren't appropriate. But
Hold
again,
on. She got a leave of absence.
okay, leave of
She got a
absence.
leave of absence. So there's still a possibility she will have her job back once this all settles down.
Wow. You see, and again, yet again, we're accustomed to this. I hate to go on this rant, but it has to be said. This is our platform. We always said that we're not going to be afraid to speak on things that it does involve us. And again, oftentimes our counterparts say, "Well, that happened in a place thousands of miles from you," as if to say that that couldn't be us. There's for every George Floyd, for every Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Jordan Edwards, Botham Jean, Atiana Jefferson. It's sad that we have to keep on going down these list of names as if it's just, oh, that was just a freak incident. That was just, it was an accident. It was, what excuse is going to be used next? So, Mike, the question I have for you next is that if the rioting continues to start or spark up across the nation, what what's the compromise? What do police? What do the military? What needs to happen to make this stop? And I know it may be a kind of loaded question, but what do you believe needs to happen to make this stop?
I think it all goes back to trust. And what you're seeing across the nation right now is communities that don't trust the government on both sides, right? So if you even think about the last presidential election, um, regardless what a lot of people want to admit, and a lot of people want to say that Trump won because of being racist or bigot or whatever. I truly believe he won because he played on the mistrust that people have in big government. And he said he was going to reduce kind of this government overreach and allow business people to kind of, thrive and things like that. And a lot of people believed in that. And so what you're seeing now is a community that just does not trust the government, and a community that does not trust police, and a community that does not trust the judicial system. And so until the community can trust that the judicial system works, and that trust that policing works, and police reports will be accurate, and reports on how people died and the manner of which they died and what caused their death is accurate, from a coroner all the way through the DA charging someone or charging a police officer and holding them accountable and requesting that the sentences be on par with other criminals that have committed those same crimes. Until you can see that equality around punishment and holding folks accountable, you will never build that trust. Um, and then also changing laws that make it more fair and equal, and not disenfranchising certain communities versus another. Again, to me, it's all about trust. And until you can build that trust, I don't see it coming together or getting much better.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Um, something that you and I had also talked about is that how, again, these these examples, these names, these people, they were people, how it's seared in our minds that how we can just quickly riddle off the names of hundreds of black men and women that have been murdered unjustly. They've been murdered, not killed. Let's really, it's a difference. People were murdered, and we we oftentimes talk about how, how angry we are, how upset we are, and the things that what we need to do to spark change and make change. And of course, head into this election year, the thing that a lot of us really focus on is, okay, the president, the president, the president. And we have to start at a local and a state level, whatever communities that we live in. We got to understand what those laws are. We got to understand the ramifications of these laws, rather than just saying, you know what, I like this person, or they stood up for these type of topics. But we have to dive deeper and understand these laws that are grandfathered in, how they impact us and our communities. So for example, if a certain community, officers aren't required to have body cam because of budget funds and funding and all this, then maybe that's something that we need to all make sure that all police in our community have the funding for body cams. Now,
Agree.
we understand that, with now the addition of body cam, now we have footage of what actually happened. Now, it doesn't mean that the narrative is going to change all of a sudden. But, to Mike's point, what we're talking about is starting within the system, and, you know, getting rid of that way of thinking, getting rid of those individuals that have been grandfathered into a system, and they get their kids grandfathered in, and preaching a way of life that is only designed for a specific group and not the masses. We're all human beings. And it's amazing how a tragic encounter with, with a whole nother nation, a whole nother, country, attacks on America, how we bonded together. I didn't hear about race and color during the attacks of 9/11, and we were tightly knit. We're a tightly knit group. And then all of a sudden, time passed, and then we got back to the ways of America: inequality, injustice. And so, for me, when I talk about some of the things that I need to do personally to help change things, is, first starting in my home and educating my kids on the unfortunate ugliness of the world, that everyone may not accept you because of the color of your skin. But how I want to raise my kids is being aware of what's going on in their surroundings, and not ever feeling like they're inadequate because someone can't deal with their own inner demons, someone who can't handle being a human being. And what that says to me is that, you know what, we can't change people, but we can influence perceptions. And sometimes, guess what? It's not worth it to influence the perception, because that person's stuck in their ways. It's always the victim's fault in their eyes. That black guy or that black woman did something. And we, growing up as kids all the way into adulthood, some of the things that people that we went to school with, they ask, why are you guys so rowdy, or why are you guys so militant? Why are you guys so angry and upset every time? And that's something, unfortunately, I just don't believe people can relate to unless they've been in our shoes, regardless of your upbringing, regardless of your status. Those are things that, that's like trying to relate to someone who has uh, been attacked by sharks as a surfer. I I never surfed a day in my life, but that doesn't stop me from having a heart and saying, hey, if I'm on the beach and I can go and help them, I'm going to help them. That's not going to stop me. The color of their skin is not going to stop me. The fact that I have never served a day in my life is not going to stop me from being a human being and helping and rendering aid. Rendering aid has no color. Rendering help and assistance is all about being a human being. And so for me, I just, I unfortunately, I agree with you. I think this is a lot of anger and hate and hostility right now against the police. And then in a matter of time, it'll kind of fester off.
You make a good point. And so one thing it just kind of popped in my mind is that people may come back and say, well, you guys have great jobs. You're in corporate America. You're not necessarily in the hood. So your experience may not be the same, right, as somebody else that had a police record and had a run-in with the cops and may have, had their life taken. Um, so I think maybe it's a good point that maybe we explain or describe some of the precautions we take in our everyday life that others may take for granted. So I'll explain one from myself. Whenever I drive my car, no matter where I'm going, in the cup holder, I always have my license, my insurance, and my registration right there in the cup holder. Because if I ever get pulled over, I don't want to have to reach in a compartment where the officer can't see where my hands are reaching and accidentally get shot, right? I've gone to lunch many times with my counterparts from work, and none of them ever have any of that information readily available. And I've even asked, hey, do you guys ever do that? And they're like, no, why should I do that? It's never even a thought. The other thing I used to do is I would ride around in my car and I would always keep one of my kids' teddy bears in the back seat. And the reason why I did is if I ever got pulled over, and I've been pulled over several times, never been to jail or any issues like that, but I've been profiled or whatnot and pulled over. And as soon as I get pulled over, I roll down all my windows. And so one of the first things they can see is a teddy bear in the back seat. And for some reason, it kind of diffuses and disarms them a little of, okay, he's not as much of a criminal or dangerous. Like, what criminal rides around with a teddy bear in his backseat, right? Right. But if you think about it, those are things that I've actively had to think about to try to make sure, how can I defuse situations that unfortunately I've been thrust in. And like I said, that those are things that my friends, which I find interesting, are silent friends in this whole issue, don't have to think about. They don't have to confront. And so, even though I may not be in a situation where someone is accusing me of forging a check or using counterfeit money or selling mixed CDs in front of a storefront or doing anything of those nature, right? There are still precautions that I feel I have to make sure that if I ever get in one of those situations, I've diffused it or I've done my part as much as I can to diffuse it and not make someone feel threatened just by my existence.
Yeah, man, that that's so telling. And it's telling and it's sad. It's pathetic that we have to indirectly ask Black men and women to find ways to protect their own lives for doing nothing at all. And thanks for sharing that experience. I have a experience where it's sad that, like, when we talk about these things, the difference of our experiences versus their experience. Where I live, I know exactly where the cops are posted up. I went to go get some. This was a probably about like 5 years ago. I went to go get some takeout, and it was nighttime. It wasn't late. It was probably about like 8:30. So I always know to, not that I'm a speed demon, I'm speeding all the time or anything like that, but I typically drive the speed limit. And on my way back from getting takeout, I'm probably less than 3 miles away from home. And there's this police SUV that's always posted in the median. And so I pass him again, doing the speed limit, which was 45 miles per hour. And all of a sudden, several seconds later, I see some flashing lights. And I said, oh, he got somebody. Oh, man, they better watch out. Not
Yes.
realizing that it was me that he was pulling over. Now, keep in mind, sports family, what I said earlier is absolutely the truth. Never been arrested for anything. If you pull me over, you're practicing. And so I mean, I guess that's pretty thugged out right there, man. I'm like, you better watch out. You better check my police record, which is none.
No.
So I'm nervous, and you and I, Mike, have talked about this dozens of times. I'm nervous. I'm scared. It is like now it's probably about like 9:15, 9:30. I'm less than 3 miles away from home. I'm like, please, Lord, let me get home to my family. This is not made up. This is our reality. And so I pulled over under a light, and so that the officer could see my every actions. And because I didn't know what to do. Again, I'm not accustomed to getting pulled over. I'm scared as hell. I rolled down my driver's side window. I turned the car off and everything. I put my hands outside of the window, and the officer walked up. And while race should not matter at all, he is a black officer, and he asked me, "Sir, is there any reason why you have your hands out of the window?" And we were taught how we were raised that you give the officer the utmost respect, whether you respect them or not, because how we were raised is they're the ones in charge at that moment because they have the gun. And I was raised that you do everything in your power to come back home. And so, again, these aren't things that are made up in our minds. And, the names that we riddled off earlier, those were human beings. They were alive and well, but they were murdered by the same individuals that were sworn to protect and serve. So I responded to the officer by saying, no disrespect, sir, all due respect. I just want to get home to my family. I'm not accustomed to being pulled over, and I'm just scared. And he would say, well, sir, you can, calm down. And still, hearing those words, you can just, sir, it's okay, you can calm down. I'm still nervous. My heart beating out of my chest because I'm gonna take what Mike said earlier, and I'm gonna start doing that. And I never thought of that, and maybe I did, and it just left my mind. But I'm gonna start putting my identification in my cup holder, because I was scared to reach in my glove box. I eventually did, slowly, calmly. With I want to make sure that regardless of who the officer is, that he sees my every action. And when I tell you why I got pulled over, you're probably gonna shake your head. And I'm not mad at the officer. I doing his job. I'm thankful that I'm alive and well. Little basic things that we shouldn't have to be thankful for, but I'm very thankful for my life. The officer pulled me over not because I was speeding, not because I have any warrants, not because I robbed a bank or shot up some people. He pulled me over because on the light on my rear tag was out. So the light that shines on the tag went out. So he couldn't see it. I didn't know about it. I don't know how you would know about it. I don't have a indicator in my car that goes off when that light goes off. So I got pulled over because the light on that shines on my tag went out. I you know, I in my mind afterwards, of course, as I'm collecting myself, I was like, wow, there's some real crimes going on in the world, and I get pulled over because the light on my tag went
And let's step back and be fair. We have someone who is very close to us that spent years in the police department, and what I can respect and what that person has told me before about that profession is, hey, I just want to go home to my family. And I totally get that. And I can totally respect that, because there are plenty of officers that went on their shift that thought they were going home to their family and walked up and got ambushed in a situation or what have you. So I'm not saying that their job is not dangerous. And I'm not saying that they should not want to go home to their families. But when we talk about a situation like George Floyd, where he is already handcuffed on the ground and no longer resisting arrest, there's no need for you to keep your knee in their neck for over 5 minutes. The fight is over. They're already subdued. They're already in custody. And that's what we're talking about. I don't want this episode and the listeners to kind of get misconstrued that we're just totally anti-police or totally. I totally respect the fact that they want to go home to their family, because we want to go home to our families, right? Um, but there's a humane way to do it. And I also get that there's a lot of their profession where they're walking into the element of surprise and may not know what they're walking into. Totally get that, totally respect that. And that's not what we're rioting for, or looting for, or protesting for. That is not what this conversation is about. It is about the humane treatment of people as you are arresting them, or as you are investigating them, as you are interacting with them, or as you have actually already have them in custody. You know, if we think about the incident in Baltimore, where the guy was already in custody in the back of the van, the police van, and somehow when he gets to the precinct, he's got injuries, that basically you cannot survive, right? And so it's those type of things that we're discussing, and those type of things we want folks to be held accountable for. Um, and it's not, and some people will take what we're saying and saying, oh, we're totally against the blue, or we're totally against police, and that is not what we're saying. That is not our thoughts or our beliefs or what have you. But there is a humanity issue on both sides that I think everyone needs to be mindful of. And it just appears that the humanity is given more leeway to the blue than it is to actual citizens that they're sworn to protect.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And let's just be real, sports family. These things are happening at an alarming rate, and they happen so often and unjustly. Again, I can't. What I want to do is give our respects to everyone that's been the victim of any police brutality, regardless of skin color, regardless of gender or social status. Um, a lot of people have been victims of that, um, and not just African Americans. Um, but when you see the treatment of African Americans, regardless of where you're at, the names that I'm here in Texas and the names that I just told you over the last 5 years, it's sad. And I'm going to take you down memory lane, because no one should ever have to endure what these people and their families endured. Jordan Edwards was a young teenager fleeing with his brother and his friends on a party that was turning sideways. Roy Oliver was the officer who shot and murdered Mr. Jordan Edwards as he was fleeing. Roy Oliver, who the blue that a lot of people protect and ride for, you got to understand, like, you got to ask yourself, oftentimes are these officers walking into a situation where that the system has is a byproduct of what the system has been doing to minorities for years. And again, Mike and I, we're not condoning any type of violence, but you got to ask yourself too, when's enough enough? You know, this young man was trying to leave a situation, he and his friends. Moments later, his brother is holding his brains in his lap. And I hate to sound so vivid, but guess what? Everybody needs that seared in their minds, because if you're upset and you're angry and you want to do something, then help. Mike said this earlier, and it's just that it is not a black issue, it's a human issue. So, my fellow Americans, I'm talking to you. If you're outraged and you're hurt and you're disgusted by this, then show how disgusted you are, not behind the scenes, but out there in the open. Have these conversations with people that don't necessarily look like you. Tell them you want to help. Show your community you want to help. But that could have been anybody's child. Botham Jean. Look at all the lies that was cooked up. Somehow the victim became the guilty. Small amounts of weed were found in his apartment. They tried to use that against him to paint this picture that he's a gangster, he's a thug. Guess what? It was for medicinal use. He had paperwork for this. And then it was like, oh shucks, we got to try another angle. Every time that, but that shows you that that's what hatred and bigotry and racism does. It rears its ugly face, and then every point that it tries to uh counteract the truth, it's foiled. It doesn't go down. But we're at a point where we don't have any answers. We're just as mad, we're just as frustrated, and we need help. And unfortunately we can't depend on that help um at a higher level. And I'm not going to go on here on this platform, saying no that person's name or anything like that. But we need help as a country, where we have to rely more so on each other, not just black people relying on black people and white people relying on white people. We have to rely on each other. We have got to get in front of each other and have these conversations. They may be painful, but guess what? It needs to happen, because if we're alive and well on this earth right now, just think about how the family of those names that we talked about, how they feel and what they're going through. And my heart goes out to them. But for me, I have to and I need to get involved, uh, because I don't know any other way. And Mike said this earlier, is that how tell us how to protest, since taking a knee is so disrespectful towards your way of life. But you don't feel that same energy when an officer is taking his knee down somebody's throat or on somebody's throat. That doesn't disgust you. But somebody kneeling for the flag to show solidarity towards a situation that impacts him and his community. So what way do we protest peacefully? We're not driving our car in a crowded protest, but there were good people on both sides of that fence. So just saying.
I
Mike,
mean,
I,
it's
I
this is
have
a
I have no more, man. I have no more.
yeah, and in sports family, again, we really want to see the change. We know a lot of this is going to be on us as a community to champion that change. Um, but we know we can't do it alone. And so, again, kind of to tie it back to the beginning, I do believe sports is going to be a great platform to bring a lot of this to the forefront. I'm hoping that more athletes not only speak up about it, um, both black and white and Latino speak up about it, but I also hope they put their resources and their platform behind actually changing laws and actually um, working with the community and police departments to bring them together, to have open dialogues, to discuss what we can do to change things. Um, to also bridge the community where communities that have a lack of trust and a lack of respect for police officers can bridge that feeling, and then you start fostering generations of folks that are minority that want to be police officers, that want to get into politics, that want to become lawyers and change laws, that want to become lobbyists. Um, that's what I am hoping for. That's the America that I would like to live in, and that's the core of what I think we can be. But it's gonna take some work, and again, we're not here to bash anybody. We're just here again shining the light on facts that as we've seen them and as we've experienced.
Thanks for that, Mike. Thank you. Well, sports family, thanks for tuning in. Hey, God bless. Be safe out there. Nothing has changed. You know what I'm saying? We're a family. We are a family. So enjoy your weekend and the rest of your week. Sports family, we love you. We out. Peace.